Hello, everybody. We are back for the coffee conversations portion of the Wealth Cafe, and I am joined today by an incredible guest, Sascha Mayer. And just to give you a little bit of background on her, in case you don't know this fabulous woman, Sascha is the co-founder and chief experience officer at Mamava, the creator of freestanding lactation spaces for breastfeeding on the go. Sascha is recognized as an expert on lactation, space design, family-friendly workplace policies, and social entrepreneurial leadership. We are going to unpack so much of that today. Her career in design started at JDK, now Solidarity of Unbridled Labor, where Mamava was incubated. As strategic director, Sascha designed and facilitated multidisciplinary, say that 10 times fast, creative collaborative sessions with brands including HP, Levi's, Lululemon, Nike Women, and Seventh Generation. What an incredible background. Prior to joining Solidarity, Sascha served as assistant press secretary for former Congressman, now Senator, Bernie Sanders. Sascha is also the host of Bodacious Optimist, a podcast focused on design brand advocacy and the people who have inspired her entrepreneurial journey. I love all of that, and we will be sure to link your incredible podcast in the show notes here. But welcome, Sascha. I'm so happy
Thanks,
you're here.
Caroline. Yeah, I'm happy to talk to you.
So you and I had a little pre-conversation kind of mapping out some things we wanted to talk about. And let's start with your founder journey. You have had an incredible journey. I covered a little bit here, but you you've changed the space, literally. Literally, figuratively, for women in the workplace. So let's talk a little bit about, and I'd love for you to just share the story from your point of view of how you were inspired to create Mamava.
Yeah, so thank you for the great introduction and the trip down memory lane. It really came about from my own experience as a breastfeeding mom, and I loved my job working for the design studio. We're based in Burlington, Vermont, and all of those fabulous clients were elsewhere. So I was constantly on planes and in conference centers and in airports. And when I returned to work after having my kids, I wanted to continue breastfeeding. And the only place, usually at that time, this is now 20 years ago, that I could find that was private to use a breast pump was usually the restroom.
Mm.
So the place that you're making food for a new human, designed for the exact opposite function and not sanitary at all.
Yep.
And coming from a design background, really wanted to figure out a design solution to this problem because it was so fundamental, right? Like everybody needs to eat, and there's no design around this function of pumping breast milk. And I saw more and more that it was a challenge for other people. It was sort of a hidden problem.
Hmm.
But you mentioned I was at a meeting at Hewlett Packard where we were facilitating offsite, and there was about maybe 15 people there, so not that big of a meeting. And we would take these breaks, and I would notice it wasn't just me who was like slinking away with this crazy black bag that had my breast pump in it. It was two other people. So a relatively small group of people, and there were two other people in this 2 day session that were also kind of figuring this out and struggling it. So there's a number of those aha moments that make you say, like, there's a project here at the very least.
Hmm.
And then eventually there's a business here where we can, solve it for the mission that we have, but also make a successful business out of it.
That's what I think is also so different about your business is it comes from, and I find that the best businesses typically do from you're solving a problem, but you're also on a mission, right? Is that just to pick out that one word you said is they're slinking away to the bathroom, right? And it's
Yeah,
almost this like taboo. And I remember when I
right.
worked in a corporate office in Manhattan, it was always that like the whisper of like, oh, there's that person go. And it's like, this is part of life
Yeah,
in the
right.
most basic form, right? We all have to eat. And so you're right. And people, you have women now going into bathrooms that are dirty or not sanitary, even at a basic function, to kind of almost be hidden in these places and creating a whole different dynamic.
Yeah, and I think the social my degree in from the university is actually sociology, and I think the brand strategist and design person in me was like, "Oh, we got to bring these things together to start the conversation, to make it visible and a more comfortable conversation to be had to start solving the problem." So as long as it remained hidden, nothing was going to change.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit more about how you, because like you have the adorable, I'll call it the mini version of the pod behind you. Where did you get, and talk me through the process of, okay, we know this is a problem, what, how, and the timeline and what it looked like to fully come up with the cute pod that you have behind you. I'm sure there's a lot between where you first had that idea,
Oh.
the offices, to the prototype sitting behind you.
Yeah, I'll try to fast forward that. This is permission to have your entrepreneurial ideas have a slow roll for those out there who have them. So my youngest was born in 2006. And that's when the idea first sparked. And then in 2008, I pitched it to my employer in the design studios, and we were working on design solutions that we could own whole cloth,
Mm,
right? So we were working for clients, but we said, let's do our own projects for problems that we see in the world. So then I said, we have to design a lactation pod.
mhm.
And we noodled on it. We worked on it in our free time, which was very little because you're always working on your client projects. And if
Yeah.
we'd have like a couple weeks, we'd, workshop it and get a little bit closer. And then in basically between 2010 and 2013, it was almost like culture caught up. So the
Mhm.
Affordable Care Act got passed in 2010. And within the Affordable Care Act, there was much more robust legislation protecting now hourly employees' ability to take break time and to have a private place that wasn't a bathroom to pump. So
Mm.
that's really where the business case happened. And, we prototyped, we networked. Long story short, we ended up working for a company that did kiosks in malls. We said, here is the brief. And they delivered back essentially this idea of that curved shape. And when we saw it, we said, that's it. Um, and we loved the fact that it actually stood out in the infrastructure and architectural landscape of an airport or a mall. The curved shape was something that said feminine. It almost could read as breast or pregnant or that kind of idea. And it starts the conversation, even though it's about creating privacy for the mom and parent who are going to use it. So then from there, it was also very deliberate that we were going to find our first partners in airports. One, because that was a pain point we had. We knew that they needed them. And
Yeah.
two, because airports are amazing pollinators.
Mm.
So somebody would see it in an airport and then call us and say, I need it for my zoo, or I need it for my factory floor, or I need it for my hospital. So that actually was relatively deliberate that we would focus on that channel first to be able to spread the idea. And we did the spreading of the idea through really compelling design that stood out. It's kind of happy, that curves are actually a very happy shape in nature, and people respond to them and are interested in them. They kind of people would say, that looks like a spaceship, and what is that? And so it was calling attention to itself while also creating privacy for the user.
Which is, it's so smart, right? Because how many people go through, and I know I've personally seen them in Newark is the airport I typically fly out of, and I see them, and you're right, it does make you smile. Like I think of, okay, too, like the curve, I'm like, oh, it kind of looks
Yeah.
like two little dimples in a smile. Like there's so much in there, which
Yes.
is in that simplicity of the shape too.
Yeah. And we call even the logo was deliberate. So we call it the Happy Breasts logo. It's a little bit of a wink, right? And we did that on purpose too, because at the time when we were creating this design, there was like a lot of like mother and child and like it's an elephant and an elephant baby and sort of this metaphorical. And, breastfeeding benefits all of us. So we wanted it to be a little bit more universal than that. And what's interesting is that our user is not our buyer. So the women who use our pods benefit from them, and it's totally free to use, as is our mobile app. But the buyer is often kind of a facilities guy, not a stereotype, but it's often a a male and someone who needs to create a solution that's easy to install, easy to clean,
Mm,
easy and affordable compared to building a room. So we had to have those tough conversations with him. And we
mhm.
did that with humor, right? We approached it with like, maybe this feels like an awkward conversation, but we're going to talk about breasts today. We are all about making things easier for mom. And actually, about 7 times out of 10, we would find that these gentlemen had their own stories of their grandkids who were breastfeeding babies or their wives and partners. And so they actually became lactivists as part of our movement to solve this problem.
Which I love that you've coined that term too, as
I
and
think it was out there. We use it a lot, but lactivists was out there probably before us.
okay, so we'll figure out, we'll like do the origin trace to see
Yeah, I like that.
who originally came up with it to give them full credit. But I do
Yeah,
love too the way you're using the terminology and also the humor behind it, right? Because
yeah,
it is a topic and a conversation that a lot of people, especially, you talked about how culture and time change things and help move that for you. And a lot of people could sit here and be like, oh, no, we don't want to talk about this. And
yeah.
on this platform, we're all about having more difficult conversations. And so normalizing that, I think, is just such an incredible part of your journey. Talk about too how you've used humor in some of your marketing and your pitches and to build your brand, because I know that's a big part of it.
Yeah, so one of our brand values, and as you mentioned, the name of our podcast is the Bodacious Optimist.
Mhm.
So it's sort of audacious, but bodacious has a little bit of a bounce to it.
Yeah.
Um, and taking ourselves not too seriously. There was recently our team put us shared a social media post of a pumping hack. So that you can produce more milk after you've had sexual relations. So things like that, which are
Yeah.
like, whoa, that stepped up to the line and pushed it. But again, to make people feel comfortable about talking about this really, really natural thing. And using that positivity. So a lot of the conversation around breastfeeding is that it's so hard and not everybody can do it. And
Mhm.
that's really good positioning for the formula companies. And we totally understand that many people have different reasons why they don't breastfeed, can't breastfeed, all different kinds of parents. But I want to reposition it as like, it's hard, we're making it easier, right?
Mhm.
And ultimately, if you're successful and if you have supportive employer and if you live in a world where there's better infrastructure for it, it's going to be much easier. It's much easier to roll over and breastfeed a child than to like go and make a bottle for them, as an example, when you're with them. And then, of course, there's just so many benefits to breastfeeding. So it's like an intervention that is preventative. And I think there's a lot of language, especially right now, which is a good thing about what are those easy things that are more preventative that we can do for the health of our populations.
And it's interesting because we all have our own journey every step of the way, right? And
Yeah.
so it can be argued, it's like, oh, well, you're only supporting this is what you're doing, right? Like this is your specialty and your
Yes.
niche is supporting
Yes.
these women in what can also be a very solitary time in their lives, right? Like you are
Yes.
you were alone in that bathroom or the other three women that joined you in that bathroom, it's you're all in this same part of life. And I think too, by
Yes.
not just building the pods, but doing the social media and everything that you're creating, the conversation around it removes a lot of that solitude.
I think that's really a good point. And one of the things I think about our brand is like we want to be like the big sister who's been through it before and has
Mm.
got your front in terms of this part of your breastfeeding experience, because a lot of that has been lost. We move away from home, or maybe our mother didn't breastfeed us and doesn't have the same information or skill set to pass on, or we're living kind of isolated. So we want to be that authority and resource as well. And actually, our mobile app not only has the search function and the function to access our pods, but it also has a little feature called Words of Support, where moms are leaving messages for each other. And it's super, super heartwarming because, they might be in one of our pods and they can send a word of support to the next person that's reaching out and saying, you're not alone in this. Literally millions and millions and millions of women are doing this every day.
That is so cool. So is it, and
Mhm.
I haven't been on the app, but
Yeah.
is it like I went to I'll stick to the one that I've seen, the airport. Like if I was in that pod in the Newark airport, is it the next person that comes into that pod or
It's a
any?
general feed,
Okay.
and so it's sort of you see them, and you can, I think you can identify if you were in that space, but it's more of a general feed. And actually, where that came from was we saw moms leaving notes for other moms, like handwritten notes. I can tell you about this is product development in pods, and we also had seen them in lactation rooms that we had visited. By the way, the app not only has our pods, but it has about 5,000 public lactation rooms as well that you
Oh,
can
that's awesome.
search via the app. So we saw people leaving notes, and then we actually created, I happened to be using some sticky notes called words of support. So when I went to travel to, sell our pods, or my colleagues did, we would leave these sticky notes in the pods. And then we would go to certain pods and we would see them covered on the interior with sticky notes and other people's sticky notes. Okay, that's a fire hazard. It's super cool. So
We love
then
this, but
yes. So then we migrated it to the app. So that's a story of product development too. Like you learn from your markets. And I think it's super heartwarming to actually have that tangible artifact of the notes, but it was getting a little bit hard to manage. And
and
so we migrated it to the app.
that's also the part that just product development, but also too, it
Yeah.
gave you the idea of, wait, we have a community here, right? Like so many
Yeah.
people would look at that pod and
Yes.
be like, oh, this is just a pod that sits in an office or a store or an airport, whatever it might be, or a mall. And you now have a community around it, which is so different and not. Did you see that? And I'd love to hear a little bit more about this when you first came up with the idea, like how far this would reach.
Yeah, part of it starts with that, the HP story among others is like, oh, there's like other people out there. And then every time I talked about it, people would be, yeah, I had this experience and share their own, right? There's a lot of therapizing by sharing, like, oh God, when I breastfed, it was, this and that challenge. So I think we did see that. And frankly, as you are working on a business, you're waiting for all of these moments of validation, right?
Mhm.
So the next really big one was when we put our first prototype in 2013 into our local airport, small airport, and in Burlington, Vermont. And the local newspaper was owned by Gannett, which owned USA Today at the time. They took pictures of these beautiful moms that we brought in that were like kind of like models that were doing us a favor and they were pumping and they just happened to be spectacular. And then that images went on the cover of our local paper. And then they went on the cover of every USA Today. At the time, that was the paper that wasn't outside of every hotel door, in the country. And oh my God, we basically didn't have we had a phone number, which I think was my personal phone number, and a very rudimentary website. And people from all over the country, not just people interested in buying pods to solve a problem, but to call up and share their own stories of challenges around breastfeeding and how much this is needed. And it wasn't just women, I remember the stay-at-home dad from Texas, who called, and there was a group of female manufacturers in another part of the country was like, we want to make these pods for you. So it was very much validated from people who had their experience and from the community. And that was like another moment that was really important to us is, wow, one prototype and I think we got something here.
And that's also too. as a business owner, you have these moments that you sit here and it's, those 2 a.m. thoughts and you're like, what have I done? Can we do this? And to be able to have those, whether they were text messages, calls, whatever it might be, letters, the newspaper article that came in, to have that too that you can
Yeah.
look back at, like you said, it's validating. And just to know that
Yeah.
you're making a difference and that this is so needed, I think is amazing.
Yes. And I just, again, to remind if there's entrepreneurs listening to this, it's like 2006, the idea, you know, 2008, pitching it, 2013, the prototype. And then we did raise our first round of funding at the end of 2015 and didn't really even hire our first employees till early 2016. So it was a process. Because we were able to incubate Mamava within the design studio, it was a bit of a slow roll,
Mhm.
but it also helped us incrementally move forward without we continued to get paid and we did our day jobs. So it was maybe
Mhm.
slower, but also a very stable way of incrementally building the business.
Yeah, and I'd love to unpack too a little bit more about your founder journey, and because it can be a very solitary time in your life as you move, and whether it's family or friends, like people are like, what are you doing? You're creating
Yeah.
pods, you're creating, whoever is listening to this, whatever your idea is. Um, Tell me a little bit more about how you were personally feeling. I'd love to zoom in on when you were transitioning from, okay, we're going to leave our day jobs and actually really go into this. We have something here. What was that time in your life like?
Yeah, so let me step back a little bit back to the isolation and the founder journey. So definitely I was the internal advocate and came up with the idea, but very early on, I knew I needed a left brain complement to my right brain creative. So finding that person in Christine Dodson, who is my co-founder and very much operationally oriented. She's about to actually take over as CEO in February. So that's a relatively new announcement. I'm so excited for that. So finding her and having that ally and just that complement to what I could bring to the party was really important. In terms of that isolation, being really open about the idea, I think of it as almost like a weather front or a hurricane is like you're fueling it with each new type of weather and energy that comes into it, and it gets bigger and bigger. So I think there is an inclination to hide your idea. Somebody might steal it, and you know
Mm,
what? If it's that easy to steal, then it's not a good idea. Um, so sharing it with a number of people because each one of them are going to provide their own input and value and make you feel less isolated, right? Having that network of advisors or people that believe in you. Similarly, as we have operated the business, running it with a lot of transparency
mm,
so people can understand the decisions that we are making and why. And I think that can be scary for business owners and managers. But to me, it is much easier to be honest, to share the numbers. We give every single employee from the hourly worker at our factory on up an equity stake. And so they feel invested, right? And one, it's a great benefit and great recruiting tool. But two, they're invested in this business and for potentially sticking around for the long haul and understanding how some of the hard decisions um, are made. I don't know if I answered that question properly, but
yeah.
I knew that I wanted to really share that how you feel less isolated is by being more open.
And I think it's building those bridges too to other and letting other people in, because it is, as a founder, it is so easy. I loved even when you did the
Yeah.
even just the hand move, it is, right? Like to close in on yourself and to hide and protect everything you're building because it feels
Yeah.
so fragile. So to build those bridges to other people and say, hey, no, we want your input. We want, because everyone has, even too, when you mentioned your co-founder, everyone has things that they are incredible at and that you need other people's um input and their
Yes.
thoughts. And I always say, like, take what you like and leave the rest. If it's not
Yeah.
everybody is going to have the best input, but you do need other voices and opinions.
Yeah, and I think that also because we're creating a whole new category, this really didn't exist before
Mhm.
we did it. It was just validating. We needed that validation along the way. But it was deliberate. So I knew that I had weaknesses
We all
and that
do.
I needed a complementary kind of brain to balance that out.
And I think, you talk about it's been a long journey, but it's also been sustainable. And I think you've done it very strategically where you weren't like, oh, I just need to hire this person and then I need to go do that. And then I need a co-founder and then da da da. And we get that crazy energy. It feels like
Right.
you were very strategic. Like I said, I don't want to use the
Yes.
word calculated. That normally is a negative connotation, but you were
Yeah.
very thorough and researched, okay, this is the person I need to complement me to really make this something different because you're so rooted in your mission.
Yes, and I think that you were asking a little bit before too, in terms of from idea to bringing it into a full-fledged business. It's capital intensive, right? We're not just a tech company. We do have this mobile app, but we also make pretty expensive pods. So the needing to raise funds in a very cautious way. We actually
Mhm.
have investors that are mostly local, and have been very conservative about the money we bring in because we want it to be useful. So usually those folks have a say, and we have wonderful early investors who've been along for the journey and are patient with us. Um, and we didn't want to over raise in terms of our funding because then you have just a complicated cap table and many
Mhm.
stakeholders to answer to.
Yes.
So I would always again advise, raise as little money as you possibly can from outside investors, because it makes things easier ultimately, and that's where we are.
Especially too and I'd love to dig into this, is where you want to go next, right? And what
Yeah.
it means. It's very different when you have a company that is, you've accepted funding, right? So you have a different,
Mm,
and this is, I love your advice too around being cautious and
yeah.
very thoughtful in how much and who you raise the money from, because when people are investors, they now have an opinion and a say, and you do have some level of having to answer to them for both positive and negative moments in the business, which can be
Yeah.
great. But it is something you have to be thoughtful of. So, what is next? What does the future look like?
So one of the things that happened with our business is that, and with many others, is that pandemic really sliced out about 2.5 years of where we ordinarily would be growing and developing. We were not stagnant, but one of the things that happened was the primary source for inbound leads was people actually seeing the units. And
Yeah.
so nobody was going to stadiums or airports and so on. Um, and then the channels that we were working in, also selling into public places, into workplaces and offices, they changed radically. So the business then pivoted more towards where the essential workers were, and they were also very busy. Healthcare. Luckily, we had a strong footing in manufacturing and warehousing.
Mm.
So we stayed strong and sort of flat and then started to grow again through the pandemic, but it was sort of this time that we lost, frankly, and I'm sure a lot of other businesses did. So now we are back stable, growing again. And where we're focusing really is actually back to the mission.
Mm.
So more leaning into the stories of the benefits of breastfeeding, how the mom herself actually feeds our flywheel
Mm.
to influence public places and to influence her employer, and then expanding our mobile app to do more things for us and for the user. So obviously it's going to continue to be free, but we're adding a scheduling modular for private businesses. It's already in pilot use. We have expanded to create a lock system, like the same locks that are on our pods that are now going to lactation rooms. So let's say you're a facility that has some pods and some lactation rooms,
Yeah.
you get the same benefit of search and managed access. And then working to provide more actual clinical lactation support via the app. So that's in very early prototyping actually. So you might be in a pod and having a question, and you can be able to
Mm.
connect through to a virtual lactation consultant via our app. So more of those things we believe move the mission to support breastfeeding. And if there's just more infrastructure, there's more support that we're actually going to see the numbers of parents who are able to breastfeed for as long as they want increase.
That's incredible just to hear you coming back to the mission, right? I feel like as so many companies as they expand, they start to stray from it, right? And so
Yes.
coming back to all of the incredible work that you are doing is it's really exciting to hear, especially as, we're pretty well ways out of the pandemic now, but we still
Hmm.
feel the ripple effects of it and it changed our world forever, right? And so people do want to continue to travel more and be able to go to airports and travel for work
Hmm.
and go into the office. And now this is not a limitation for a
Yeah.
woman who is, I think of a lot of my clients who work in the corporate space who they may not have been able to breastfeed for as long as they wanted.
Yes.
And I like that you say that it's the option. It's whatever they want to
Yes.
do, and they now have this capability that is empowering.
Yes, and I think that a small silver lining from the pandemic, there's an expectation to be better supported as the full human being you are, even if you're going back to the office. So that's really something that I think is momentum for us as well. Not to mention, there's been even better legislation passed in 2022, legislation passed to basically be more comprehensive. It's not just the hourly employee that's protected under the law, it's now salaried employees. And the Pump Act actually creates a pathway for bringing a lawsuit to an employer that has not taken action against a request for putting in a designated lactation space. So now we're seeing a little more in the way of lawsuits that are actually compelling more businesses to actually solve this problem.
That's amazing. And I know this is just, even though you are almost 20 years in at this point, I feel like this is just the beginning of how much good and change that you are going to do and the rest of the Mamava team. So I am thankful for you and everything and for that little incubator that you put together in 2006 and where it's grown to. I do like to ask everybody one final question. Are you ready?
Okay.
Oh boy, I don't tell anybody ahead of
Oh,
time.
I
So you
know.
get your genuine answer. What is one thing that you do that makes you feel wealthy on just a daily basis or on a smaller scale?
I like to scan my body and I like to be outside, and the wealth of nature that just comes, and again, living in Vermont is a deliberate, sometimes very inconvenient choice. But being outside, going for a walk, it's often dark when I'm getting out of work, but even doing that in the moonlight is where I feel privileged and wealthy, and that's what I would answer that question.
I'm sure breathing in, even at nighttime, right? If it's like you have the moon glow, but having that fresh Vermont air has to just
Yes,
reinvigorate your entire body.
it totally does.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on today. If people want to connect with you, learn more about Mamava, where should they reach out to you? What sites? Give us all the details.
Yeah, the best place is definitely for me personally, LinkedIn. You can find me at Sascha Mayer. And Mamava has amazing social media feeds on Facebook and Instagram, and we love to hear from folks there. So connect through. You can message us there, but LinkedIn is really the best place to talk to me. And again, the Bodacious Optimist is our podcast, and we talk to thought leaders, designers, entrepreneurs who are solving big problems, and we'd love for you to listen.
Awesome. And we will link all of those down in the show notes. And thank you again for coming on. We will see everybody next week. Bye.